Haunted Forest, what they don't want you to know. Some forests are just forests. Some are older than time itself, and some don't want you to leave. This is the story of Blackwood Forest, a place so cursed that even the locals refuse to say its name. A place where people go missing, and where the trees whisper your name at night. The forest that watches you. Deep in the mountains of Oregon, far from the highways, there's a stretch of wilderness that has been off limits for decades. The government calls it a wildlife protection zone. The locals call it a death trap. For as long as anyone can remember, hikers have entered Blackwood Forest, but never come out. The police don't search there. Rangers refuse to patrol it. And the few who have tried come back changed, if they come back at all. And it all started with the cabin, the last campers. Back in 1996, a group of 3 college students went into Blackwood Forest on a camping trip. They had heard the rumors, stories about people going missing, strange lights between the trees, and voices calling out from the darkness. But they didn't believe in ghost stories. So, armed with flashlights, sleeping bags, and a single cheap camcorder, they set up camp near an abandoned log cabin. The cabin was wrong. The walls were rotting, but the inside looked untouched. A dining table still set for 3, a pot on the stove, long dried out, and worst of all, on the walls, carved into the wood, were the words, "Don't look at it." Something in the trees. That night, as the fire crackled and their laughter faded, they started to hear it. The clicking, faint, rhythmic, like someone tapping on tree bark. At first, they thought it was an animal, until the clicking moved, from tree to tree, circling them, getting closer. And then, from somewhere in the darkness, a voice, soft, almost a whisper. "Do you see it?" One of them, Danny, grabbed his flashlight and shined it toward the trees. And for just a second, he saw it, a tall, thin figure standing between the trees, watching, smiling. Danny screamed. The figure vanished, but the clicking didn't stop. It got faster. The cabin's secret. They ran into the cabin, bolting the door. Danny was shaking. "It was tall," he whispered. "Too tall, and its face, it had no eyes." Then the knocking started. Slow, steady, from the roof, then the walls, surrounding them. That's when they remembered the message on the wall. "Don't look at it." The knocking got louder. The walls started to shake, and then, from under the floorboards, a whisper. "You already did." The last recording. The next morning, rangers found the campsite abandoned. The tent was torn apart. The cabin door stood wide open. But the strangest thing? The camera was still there. It had one final recording. The footage was shaky, but you could hear the panic in their voices. Then static. And right before the screen went black, a single frame. A figure, tall, grinning, standing inside the cabin, behind them. The disappearances continue. To this day, no one knows what happened to those campers. Their bodies were never found. But Blackwood Forest is still there, and hikers still go missing, every year. And every now and then, someone reports seeing a figure between the trees, watching, waiting. If you ever find yourself deep in the woods and you hear clicking, don't turn around, because some things only exist when you see them. That's tonight's story. If you've ever heard something in the woods that shouldn't have been there, maybe it wasn't alone. If you like this story, subscribe and hit the notification bell for more terrifying tales. And let me know in the comments, have you ever felt like something was watching you in the forest? Until next time, sleep well. The terrifying forest, the creepiest encounter. Some forests are beautiful, some forests are peaceful, and some forests don't want you to leave. This is the story of one man's encounter with something he was never meant to see. A story that proves sometimes the deepest parts of the woods hide something far worse than wolves. The Forgotten Path. Eric was an experienced hiker. He had been exploring trails all across Montana for years. He wasn't afraid of the dark, of being alone in the woods, or of the stories locals told about the places you should never go. Until he went there himself. It was early October, and the weather was perfect. Crisp air, golden leaves, the scent of pine drifting through the forest. Eric had been hiking for 6 hours when he noticed something strange. A path, narrow, overgrown, half hidden behind a wall of thick brush. It wasn't on his map. It shouldn't have been there. And yet, it looked walked on. like someone or something still used it. The whispers in the trees curious, Eric pushed his way through the brush and onto the path. That was his first mistake. The deeper he walked, the quieter the forest became. No birds, no wind, no distant rustling of animals in the underbrush, just silence. And then, a whisper, soft, faint. It came from somewhere ahead of him. He stopped, held his breath. Another whisper, closer. Eric's fingers tightened around the strap of his backpack. He told himself it was just the wind. Then he saw them, the footprints. A trail of bare footprints in the dirt. But something was wrong. They weren't human. The toes were too long, the shape was too narrow, and they didn't start from anywhere. They just appeared, right in front of him, and they kept going. Something is following me. A chill crept up Eric's spine. The sun was starting to set. He needed to turn back. But as soon as he did, he saw it. A figure, standing between the trees, just far enough away that he couldn't make out its face. Tall, too tall. Its arms were wrong, too thin, too long, and worst of all, it was leaning. Its head tilted, its body twisted at an unnatural angle, watching him, waiting. Eric's throat went dry. His instincts screamed at him to run. But then, the figure moved. Not walked, not stepped, just shifted. 1 second it was standing in the trees, the next, it was closer, much closer. And then, the whisper started again, but this time, they were coming from behind him. Trapped in the forest, Eric didn't wait. He ran. Branches tore at his arms, his legs, his face. The path was gone, swallowed by the thickening woods, but he didn't care. He just needed to get out. Then the whispering stopped, the air went still, and Eric found himself standing in a clearing. Empty, silent, except there was something in the middle of it. A tree, twisted, hollow, blackened, and at its base, something carved into the bark. A word, his name, and then the footsteps behind him. The thing that followed him home. Eric doesn't remember how he got back to his car. One moment, he was staring at the tree. The next, he was speeding down the mountain road, gripping the wheel so tight his knuckles turned white. He didn't stop until he was miles away. Didn't sleep for days. But when he finally did, he woke up to something scratching against his window. Slow, deliberate, like fingernails on glass. And when he turned to look, he saw his reflection in the window. Except, it wasn't moving with him, it was smiling. The forest never forgets. To this day, Eric refuses to talk about what happened in those woods, but he never hikes alone anymore. And sometimes late at night, he still hears it, that whisper, calling his name, from somewhere just outside his window. So if you ever find yourself in the woods and you stumble upon a path that isn't on the map, don't take it. Because some paths were never meant for us. That's tonight's story. If you've ever had a strange experience in the woods, maybe you weren't alone. If you liked this story, subscribe and hit the notification bell for more terrifying tales. And let me know in the comments, what's the creepiest thing that's ever happened to you in the forest? Until next time, sleep well. The Chilling Train, a nightmare come to life. Some nightmares end when you wake up. But what if the nightmare is the journey itself, and there's no way off? This is the story of a train that never reaches its destination, a passenger who shouldn't have been there, and the terrifying truth about a one-way trip into darkness. The last train of the night. It happened to Emily Grant, a 26-year-old nurse heading home after a long shift. It was late, 11:45 p.m., and the last train was pulling into the station. Emily had taken this route 100 times before. Green Line, eastbound, 4 stops to her apartment. But when the train arrived, something felt off. The usual bright interior lights were dim. The conductor's window was empty, and when the door slid open, the chime sounded distorted like an old cassette tape warping. Emily hesitated, but the platform was empty, and the next train wouldn't come until morning. So she stepped on board. The doors hissed shut behind her, and the train pulled away. The passengers who weren't there. Emily expected the usual late-night crowd. Drunk college kids, tired office workers, but the car was almost empty, except for 3 people. A man in a business suit, staring blankly ahead. A woman in an old-fashioned dress, her hands folded tightly in her lap. And an elderly man, sitting in the back corner, whispering to himself. No one moved, no one blinked. Emily slid into a seat near the middle, trying to shake the unease crawling up her spine. That's when she noticed the advertisements above the windows. They weren't for modern products. They were for cigarette brands banned decades ago, for movies that premiered in the 1950s. And in the middle of the ad strip, a missing persons flyer. Her face, same hair, same clothes. Last seen boarding the eastbound train at 11:45 p.m. The ride that never ends. Emily's heart pounded. She stood up, ready to move to the next car. But the doors wouldn't open. The train wasn't stopping. Outside the window, the familiar tunnels had vanished. There were no lights, no signs, just endless black. Panic rising, she turned to the elderly man, the only one who seemed aware of his surroundings. "Where's this train going?" she asked, voice shaking. He didn't look up, just kept whispering, "We missed our stop. We all missed our stop." The announcement that changed everything. The intercom crackled to life, but it wasn't the usual automated voice. It was hers. Emily's own voice, calm and cold. "Next stop, nowhere. All passengers, please remain seated." The man in the suit turned. The woman in the dress smiled. Their faces were wrong, skin too smooth, eyes too hollow, like mannequins. Emily stumbled backward, slamming the door with both fists. The elderly man finally looked up, tears in his eyes. "Don't fight it," he whispered. "That's how they find you." The truth behind the train. Emily did the only thing she could. She pulled out her phone, heart racing. No signal, but the clock still worked. It read 11:45 p.m., the exact moment she boarded. Time wasn't moving, and neither was she. The train wasn't taking her home. It was keeping her right where it wanted her. The final stop. Desperate, Emily ran down the aisle, ignoring the passengers who now stood perfectly still, their heads turning to watch her. The intercom crackled again. Final stop, last chance to exit. The train lurched, the lights flickered, and for a brief moment, the door at the end of the car slid open. Without thinking, Emily jumped. The aftermath. She hit the cold concrete of an abandoned platform, bruised and gasping for air. The train? Gone. No lights, no sound. No tracks, just empty space. Emily stumbled toward the exit, shaking, heart pounding in her chest. But when she reached the top of the stairs, the clock above the station still read 11:45 p.m. Time had never moved. And when she looked back down at the tracks, the train was there again. Waiting, doors open, the final warning. Emily never took the train again. She moved, changed jobs, but some nights when she drives past the old station, she still sees it. That chilling train sitting empty on the platform. And if you ever find yourself standing alone late at night and a train arrives that wasn't on the schedule, don't get on. Because once the doors close, you're never getting off. That's tonight's story. Have you ever experienced something strange while traveling? Let me know in the comments. And if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more chilling tales. Until next time, sleep well.